Something about the 2026 World Cup started feeling wrong long before the first whistle blew. FIFA called it protection, a shield against summer heat, but the deeper people looked, the less that explanation held together. Hydration breaks were mandatory, scripted, timed, and convenient. Convenient for whom? Because when the most watched tournament on Earth pauses on command, millions stop, cameras reset, sponsors flood the screen, and money starts moving in silence. Stay with us, because by the end of this story, you will understand why Lionel Messi suspected that football was interrupted for reasons no one wanted to say publicly. This was not some rule change buried in paperwork. The 2026 World Cup will stretch across the United States, Mexico, and Canada. 48 teams, dozens of stadiums, billions of viewers, and pressure unlike anything football has ever carried. FIFA said the breaks existed to protect bodies from dangerous temperatures. That sounded reasonable. It sounded humane. But then, the same stoppages appeared in matches where the air was cool, the sun was fading, and players were not gasping for rescue. If this is the kind of reporting you have been waiting for, subscribe now, because the pattern gets more unsettling. That was the contradiction at the heart of everything. A measure sold as safety was behaving like scheduling. A pause described as medical was functioning like media inventory. Think about that for a moment. If the break happens whether conditions are dangerous or comfortable, whether the risk is real or remote, then what is being protected? The players? Or the business model built around them? Messi saw the contradiction everyone else felt but could not prove. The rule did not stop matches. It split the sport into two versions: the game on the grass and the game behind the cameras. At first, nobody challenged it openly. Heat waves were real, summers were harsher. Player welfare was an argument nobody wanted to sound cruel enough to question. FIFA knew that. The language was perfect, protective, responsible, untouchable. And that is what made it so powerful. The strongest narratives are not the loudest ones. They are the ones that arrive wearing virtue. Yet coaches started noticing the timing. Television crews were always ready. Graphic packages rolled instantly. Sponsor boards filled the pause with certainty. Everything looked rehearsed, not improvised. Not like an emergency response, but like a slot. A valuable, sellable slot. Then came the matches that made the official story wobble. Evening kickoffs. Mild temperatures, stadium roofs, breezes instead of suffocating heat. And still the whistle came for the break right on schedule, as though the climate outside mattered less than the clock inside somebody's contract. Players exchanged looks, staff members asked questions, commentators softened their language, then sharpened it, then backed away again. Because everybody could see the oddity, but very few people wanted to accuse the most powerful institution in football of building commercial interruptions into the bloodstream of the World Cup. That accusation was explosive. Messi noticed everything. He did not storm into a press conference and throw gasoline on the fire. That was never his style. Instead, he watched. He asked who benefited, who negotiated, who sold the inventory around the stoppages, and why broadcasters seemed ready for the breaks before some teams were. People close to camps began sharing suspicion. The pauses were becoming ad windows wrapped in wording. Pull back and the picture grows darker. The more predictable the interruption, the easier it becomes to package. The easier it becomes to package, the more it becomes to sell. That is when Messi understood the leverage. He was not alone for long. Players complained that rhythm was broken. Coaches complained that plans were being interrupted by a schedule they did not control. Supporters complained that intensity dissolved into commercials. And yet, FIFA kept pointing back to safety, back to care, back to responsibility. Say it enough times and it starts sounding unquestionable. Say it enough times and it starts sounding holy. But here is where it changes. Messi was not interested in winning a shouting match. He was interested in trapping the contradiction, forcing FIFA to reveal whether the breaks were about health or about harvest. So he moved quietly, not as a superstar chasing headlines, but as a veteran entering his last World Cup with nothing left to prove on the field and everything left to protect off it. Conversations began behind closed doors. Germany listened. Brazil listened, Colombia listened, Mexico listened, France listened. One by one, powers saw an opening. If FIFA insisted the breaks were noble, then let those breaks serve the people inside the sport, not the corporations around it. Messi's coalition was devastating. Take every cent of ad revenue from those stoppages and redirect it into facilities recovery spaces and player conditions. That proposal was a masterstroke because it put Gianni Infantino in a trap with no exit. Approve it, and he admits the breaks are generating money significant enough to be redistributed, which means Messi's suspicion was justified. Reject it, and the refusal raises a harsher question. If the pauses are about safety, why should the revenue attached to them remain in corporate hands instead of improving the lives of the athletes asked to perform in conditions? Accept and you validate the accusation. Refuse and you magnify it. Sit with that. Sit with that because this is where optics become evidence. And the pressure did not stop there. Once the idea was spoken among elite squads, a more dangerous possibility emerged. What happens if the players decide not to cooperate? What happens if during a future World Cup match the scheduled break arrives and the stars keep playing or stand in place and refuse the ritual FIFA designed for them? That would not be rebellion. That would be a global image, a devastating image. The sport's biggest names exposing the machinery in real time, refusing to help transform fatigue into profit, refusing to turn their bodies into billboards disguised as care. Before we go deeper, if this is the kind of coverage you have been looking for, subscribe and turn on notifications, because what comes next is not about Messi or one tournament. It is about who football belongs to now. For decades, the sport sold itself as a people's game, built by neighborhoods, sustained by fans, carried by players whose legs, lungs, pain, and brilliance made anthem matter. But football is also a system of packaging, timing, extraction, and control. When even a break starts looking like inventory, the argument is no longer about hydration. The argument is about ownership. That picture is why this story lands hard. The conflict is not Messi versus FIFA. It is labor versus power. It is the people who create the spectacle versus the institutions that monetize the pauses between moments. Every era of football has had its battle over control, calendars, bodies, and money. This may be the next one. Because once players start asking where interruption revenue goes, they are no longer debating comfort. They are auditing the structure itself. And if the structure cannot survive that audit, then perhaps the problem was never the heat. Perhaps the problem was hunger instead. For Messi, that matters more than headlines. This is supposed to be his final World Cup, the last chapter of a career drenched in trophies, arguments, miracles, and impossible standards. He does not need another myth. He does not need another commercial. What he can still do, however, is something rarer. He can force a moral reckoning from inside the game's most protected stage. Not as a rebel without standing, but as a legend with leverage. Not as an outsider throwing stones, but as the face of football asking who profits when the match stops and the cameras keep feeding. So now the question is no longer whether the hydration breaks exist. The question is what they serve. Safety or spectacle, care or commerce, protection or profit. Those questions are hanging over the 2026 World Cup already, and if Messi's coalition holds, they will not disappear when the anthem ends. They will get louder, much louder. So tell us what you think. If players refuse a stoppage, is it courage or chaos? And if this story opened eyes like the video, subscribe and join us in comments because football may be decided in moments when the ball is not moving. Because that may be the truth hidden inside this fight. Football does not lose itself at once. It loses itself minute by minute, compromise by compromise, interruption by interruption, until the people who make the game are asked to pretend that every pause is noble and every profit is natural. Messi seems to understand that danger. That is why this story matters. That is why this matters. Not because one break can change a tournament, but because one exposed motive can change how millions see power. And once people see it, the game can never look innocent again.